night settles and the noise of the day fades, Psalm 25 invites us into a posture of trust that is both humble and strong. This psalm is not a request for escape from problems, but an education of the soul, training the heart to rest in God even when answers are incomplete. Night prayer becomes a classroom where faith is strengthened, not by activity, but by surrender. Psalm 25 begins with a clear direction, lifting the soul to God. This act is intentional. It teaches that peace does not come from ignoring fear, but from placing fear in the right hands. When we prepare for sleep, our minds often replay worries, conversations, and uncertainties. The psalm redirects this mental energy toward trust, reminding us that God is not surprised by what we could not fix today. Sleeping in God's peace is an act of faith. It says, I acknowledge my limits, and I trust your wisdom beyond them. Educationally, this is important because it reframes rest as responsibility, not avoidance. Rest becomes cooperation with God's design. A rested mind is better equipped for wisdom, patience, and clarity tomorrow. Psalm 25 also teaches about protection, not only physical safety, but moral and emotional guarding. At night, the mind is vulnerable. Anxiety grows louder in silence. This prayer trains us to ask God to guard our thoughts, to keep shame, fear, and confusion from defining us. Protection means that even while we sleep, our identity remains secure in God's truth. The psalm emphasizes guidance. Show me your ways. Teach me your paths. This is especially meaningful before sleep because learning does not stop when activity ends. When we ask God to teach us, we acknowledge that life is a process. Some lessons take time and some answers unfold gradually. Waiting becomes a form of trust, not weakness. There is also a quiet reassurance in this prayer about relationships. God's guidance includes the people who walk alongside us. When you see a name, remember this. Discernment grows from prayer, not pressure. God's direction is consistent with peace, not confusion. Trust that He aligns relationships according to purpose, growth, and timing. As you close your eyes tonight, Psalm 25 reminds you that God is faithful to those who seek Him sincerely. Your sleep becomes an offering. Your rest becomes a declaration. God is in control. God is teaching. God is protecting. And in that truth, your soul finds peace, deep, steady, and unshaken. Trust as a learned practice is one of the deepest lessons found in Psalm 25, especially when it is applied to night prayer and rest. Trust here is not presented as a sudden feeling that appears when life becomes easy, but as a discipline that develops through repeated choice. Educationally, this teaches us that faith grows the same way skills grow, through practice, reflection, and consistency. When night arrives, we are given a daily opportunity to train our hearts in trust by deciding where we place our thoughts before sleep. Psalm 25 begins with an intentional act of lifting the soul toward God. This shows that trust starts with direction. The human mind naturally drifts toward worry, regret, and fear at night because distractions fade and unresolved thoughts rise to the surface. The psalm educates us that trust must be active, not passive. We choose to redirect the mind. This redirection is a learned behavior. Over time, the heart becomes trained to seek God first instead of rehearsing anxiety. Trust as a practice also involves honesty. Psalm 25 does not hide confusion or weakness. It acknowledges the need for guidance, forgiveness, and protection. This teaches that trust is not pretending everything is fine. It is admitting limitations while still believing in God's wisdom. When practiced at night, this honesty becomes healing. Instead of suppressing fears, we present them to God, which reduces emotional pressure and prepares the mind for rest. From an educational perspective, night prayer shapes cognitive patterns. What we think about before sleep often influences emotional health and decision-making. Psalm 25 teaches us to focus on God's faithfulness rather than personal failure. This repeated focus retrains the brain to associate rest with safety instead of stress. Over time, trust becomes less forced and more natural because the mind has learned where security truly comes from. Trust also involves waiting, a theme clearly emphasized in Psalm 25. Waiting is often misunderstood as inactivity, but the psalm teaches waiting as confident expectation. Night. Waiting takes the form of releasing unanswered questions until morning. This is a powerful discipline because it teaches patience and humility. We learn that not every problem requires immediate resolution and that God's timing is wiser than our urgency. Practicing trust at night also protects emotional health. Many people struggle with rest because they feel responsible for everything. Psalm 25 corrects this mindset by reminding us that guidance belongs to God. When we pray before sleep, we symbolically hand over responsibility. This act reduces mental overload and reinforces the truth that God remains active even while we rest. Sleep then becomes an expression of faith rather than a sign of neglect. Another educational aspect of trust as a practice is memory. Psalm 25 repeatedly refers to remembering God's mercy and love. Trust grows when memory is trained. Night prayer becomes a moment to recall past faithfulness instead of past mistakes. This shift in memory focus strength, unless confidence, and stabilizes emotions. Over time, the heart learns to expect goodness rather than fear loss. Trust is also relational. Psalm 25 shows that trust deepens through relationship with God, not through control of circumstances. Night prayer nurtures this relationship by creating quiet space. Silence becomes meaningful rather than uncomfortable. In this silence, trust matures because it is no longer dependent on visible outcomes. It becomes rooted in character. Specifically, God's character is faithful and just when applied to personal relationships. This practice of trust brings clarity. The psalm teaches that God guides the humble. Before sleep, reflecting on this truth helps release confusion about people and situations. Trust means believing that God orders relationships with purpose. This reduces impulsive thinking and emotional dependency, replacing them with peace and discernment. Trust as a learned practice also builds resilience. Each night we choose trust, we strengthen our ability to face uncertainty the next day. Psalm 25 does not promise a life without difficulty, but it promises guidance through it. This understanding reframes challenges as part of growth rather than threats to peace. As night closes the day, Psalm 25 teaches that trust is renewed daily. It is not a one-time achievement. Every evening becomes a lesson, every prayer a rehearsal of faith. Over time, this discipline transforms rest into restoration. The soul learns to settle, the mind learns to release, and the heart learns to depend not on its own strength, but on God's unfailing care. In this way, trust becomes not just something we believe, but something we live, even as we sleep. Guidance before rest is a powerful principle rooted in Psalm 25, teaching that night prayer is not merely a ritual, but a mental and spiritual reset. Educationally, this keynote shows how intentional reflection before sleep shapes clarity, emotional balance, and future decisions. The mind does not sim. Fly turn off at night. It processes, organizes, and reinforces what it has been given. Psalm 25 invites us to give the mind direction before rest, ensuring that what is processed is peace rather than pressure. As the day ends, unfinished tasks and unanswered questions often dominate our thoughts. Psalm 25 responds by modeling a prayer that places guidance above control. The psalmist asks God to teach, lead, and show the right path. This teaches that guidance does not begin in action, but in submission. Before sleep, we acknowledge that human understanding is limited. This acknowledgement is not weakness, it is wisdom. When the mind accepts guidance instead of chasing certainty, it becomes calm enough to rest. From an educational standpoint, night guidance reduces mental overload. When we do not consciously release decisions and worries, the brain continues working through them during sleep, often leading to restlessness. Psalm 25 trains us to pause and redirect that energy toward God's instruction. By doing this consistently, the mind learns a healthier pattern. Problems are entrusted, not carried into rest. Guidance before rest also teaches prioritization. Psalm 25 does not ask for every detail to be explained. It asks for God's ways and paths. This shows that wisdom focuses on direction rather than outcomes. At night, this principle helps us stop overanalyzing. Instead of demanding immediate answers, we seek alignment with God's truth. This alignment brings peace because it shifts focus from results to relationship. Night prayer guided by Psalm 25 also shapes moral awareness. The psalm includes a request for forgiveness and integrity, reminding us that reflection before sleep includes self-examination. Educationally, this develops accountability without condemnation. We review the day honestly, not to punish ourselves, but to learn. This reflective habit strengthens character and promotes growth over guilt. Another important aspect of guidance before rest emotional regulation. Psalm 25 acknowledges enemies, fear, and distress, yet it does not allow these emotions to dominate the prayer. Instead, it places them under God's authority. This teaches us how to process emotions constructively. At night, rather than suppressing feelings, we name them and then release them. This practice reduces anxiety and promotes deeper, more restorative sleep. Guidance at night also prepares the mind for future choices. What we surrender at night often returns with clarity in the morning. Psalm 25 shows that guidance is progressive. God teaches step by step. This understanding removes the pressure to resolve everything now. Educationally, it encourages patience and trust in long-term learning rather than instant answers. This keynote also highlights the role of humility. Psalm 25 emphasizes that God guides the humble. Before rest, humility is expressed by admitting dependence. We accept that we are not self-sufficient. This acceptance quiets the ego and allows peace to enter. The mind rests better when it is not defending pride or rehearsing self-justification. Guidance before rest extends to relationships as well. When thoughts about people disturb our sleep, Psalm 25 teaches us to ask God for wisdom rather than react emotionally. This practice creates emotional boundaries. We learn not to resolve relational tension at night, but to place it in God's care. Over time, this leads to healthier interactions and less impulsive decision-making. Educationally, this form of night guidance builds consistency. Each evening becomes a checkpoint for alignment. Instead of ending the day in exhaustion, we end it in reflection. The mind recognizes this pattern and begins to associate night with release rather than stress. This improves overall well-being and spiritual maturity. Finally, guidance before rest transforms sleep into an act of faith. Choosing to rest after prayer declares that God is active even when we are not. Psalm 25 teaches that guidance does not depend on constant effort, but on trustful surrender. When practiced daily, this truth reshapes how we view rest, not as wasted time, but as sacred preparation. In this way, night prayer becomes a teacher, training the heart to rely on God's wisdom and wake with renewed clarity and peace. Peace through surrender is one of the most transformative lessons found in Psalm 25, especially when applied to night prayer. This keynote teaches that peace is not achieved by solving every problem before sleep, but by consciously releasing control into God's hands. Educationally, this reframes peace from being a result of circumstances to being a response of trust. The psalm shows that surrender is not defeat. It is alignment with a greater wisdom. At night, the desire for control becomes more visible. During the day, activity can mask anxiety, but when silence comes, unresolved concerns surface. Psalm 25 addresses this human experience by guiding the heart away from self-reliance and to toward dependence on God. Surrender begins with recognition. We recognize that we cannot manage everything, predict outcomes, or protect ourselves perfectly. This recognition is the doorway to peace because it removes the burden of false responsibility. From an educational perspective, surrender before sleep reduces mental resistance. Much of anxiety comes from resisting uncertainty. Psalm 25 teaches us to face uncertainty with trust rather than tension. When we surrender, the mind stops fighting what it cannot change. This allows the nervous system to relax, creating conditions for deeper rest. Over time, the body learns that prayer signals safety, not struggle. Peace through surrender also involves releasing the past. Psalm 25 includes reflection on mistakes and the need for mercy. This teaches that surrender is not only about the future, but also about letting go of guilt and regret. At night, replaying past errors can steal peace. The psalm educates us to place our past in God's car. Trusting his mercy more than our self-criticism. This release restores emotional balance and self-compassion. Another dimension of surrender is releasing outcomes. Psalm 25 does not demand specific results, it seeks God's way. This distinction is critical for peace. When we attach peace to outcomes, rest becomes impossible. When we attach peace to trust, rest becomes natural. Night prayer trains the heart to desire alignment over control. This shift produces calm because it removes the pressure of prediction. Peace through surrender also strengthens resilience. By surrendering nightly, we learn that rest does not mean vulnerability, but renewal. Psalm 25 reassures that God protects those who trust him. This assurance allows the mind to let go of constant vigilance. Educationally, this teaches that protection is not achieved by worry, but by trust. A surrendered heart sleeps knowing it is not alone. Surrender at night also affects identity. When we stop striving, we stop defining ours elves by productivity or success. Psalm 25 reminds us that our worth is rooted in God's relationship with us, not in our performance. This truth brings peace because it stabilizes identity. The mind rests better when it no longer needs to prove value. In relationships, surrender brings emotional peace. Night often amplifies relational concerns. Psalm 25 teaches us to entrust people to God rather than control them through worry. This practice builds emotional boundaries and reduces dependency. Peace grows when we accept that guidance belongs to God and that relationships unfold according to his wisdom.